evening and welcome to the third panel with scholars and artists held in conjunction with Printing the Revolution, the Rise and Impact of Chicano Graphics, 1965 to now, an exhibition that brings together 5 decades of printmaking by Chicanx artists and their cross-cultural collaborators. I'm E. Carmen Ramos, curator of Latinx art and acting chief curator at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And I'm proud to have organized this exhibition alongside Claudia Zapata and delighted to greet all of you tonight. Thank you for being here. First, we want to gratefully acknowledge the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home in Washington, D.C., the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we convene, and the labor of people who were enslaved in constructing the historic building that is home to the Smithsonian American Art Museum. We welcome our viewers to reflect and honor on the Native communities in their own region. Tonight's conversation, titled The Legacy of Printmaking, tackles a distinctive aspect of our project, the fact that our exhibition intentionally includes and calls out non-Chicanx artists who were active participants, collaborators, and colleagues within Chicano print centers and networks. These links emerge for many reasons, including that many Chicano print centers and institutions were neighborhood-based centers, which served and welcomed all people from within the local community. Political solidarity and artistic activism also drew artists together who shared similar progressive aims. It was important for us to highlight the ways in which the Chicano graphics movement and the institutions that shaped it were influential centers of cultural exchange that had an impact beyond the Chicano artists who are an essential part of these networks. For too long, Chicanx art, and by extension, Latinx art, has been seen in a self-contained way. I wanted our project to challenge this paradigm by showing how this graphic movement influenced and welcomed artists from many walks of life, modeling the inclusive practices that we hail today. I personally came to understand the far-reaching impact of the Chicano graphics through the work of the Dominican York Proyecto GRAFICA, a collection of Dominican American artists instigated in part by Pepe Coronado, one of our panelists tonight. The impetus to form this collective of New York City-based printmakers came from various sources, one of the most important being Pepe's exposure and close contact with Chicano printmakers and centers. Other examples abound, including the experiences of Jos Sances, our other panelists, who co-founded Mission Gráfica with Chilean-born artist Renee Castro in San Francisco's Mission District. Tonight, we will delve into these examples to better understand the nuanced impact of Chicano graphics networks. I cannot think of a better moderator for our discussion than Tatiana Reinoza. Tatiana is an assistant professor of art history at the University of Notre Dame, who specializes in the history of printmaking in Latinx communities with an emphasis on the themes of immigration, race, and histories of colonialism. Her own journey as an immigrant from El Salvador and the interdisciplinary training in the fields of ethnic studies and art history have shaped her intellectual formation. Her own interest in printmaking emerged out of her close contact as a young student with the Sacramento-based Chicano collective, the Royal Chicano Air Force. She is currently at work on an edited anthology that commemorates the 50th anniversary of the East Los Angeles graphic workshop, Self-Help Graphics, and contributed an insightful essay to the Printing the Revolution catalog. Tatiana will first share some of her reflections on our topic, and will then introduce our panelists, who will each have a chance to speak about their own trajectory. That will be followed by a discussion, and then I'll rejoin the program and open the floor to audience questions. Please remember to use the question and answer function to submit your queries. Thank you again, and I welcome Tatiana to the virtual stage.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm going to be sharing my screen. So let me put that up. And can everybody see that okay? All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be here tonight, and what a delight it is to moderate this panel on the legacy of printmaking. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Carmen Ramos and Claudia Zapata for all of the incredible work that they have done to bring this exhibition to fruition, produce such an outstanding catalog, and develop this virtual conversation series. As Carmen mentioned, I'm a print scholar dedicated to studying the history of Latinx printmaking. And when she mentioned the topic of tonight's program, I thought of how I might explain the significance of this exhibition in relation to a longer history of radical printmaking in the United States. That led me to the WPA's Federal Art Project, which was established in 1935 to employ artists during the Great Depression. The Graphic Arts Division of the program employed almost 800 artists across 36 American cities. One of these artists was Elizabeth Olds, known for working in social realist themes. She was particularly attentive to the creative life of African Americans in Harlem, but also the plight of American workers. She established the silkscreen unit of the Graphic Arts Division in 1939. While the Graphic Arts Division was in full swing, artists in Mexico City were also busy developing workshop spaces like the Taller de Gráfica Popular. Founded in 1937, the TGP specialized in linoleum cuts and attracted artists invested in its social justice issues. The African-American sculptor and printmaker Elizabeth Catlett visited the workshop in 1946, and after establishing her permanent residency in Mexico, she became a member of the TGP in 1947, where she continued her work raising awareness of the racism that African-American communities experienced in the US. One of the beneficiaries of the WPA's Federal Art Project was the African-American artist Robert Blackburn, who at the age of 13 began taking art lessons at the Harlem Arts Community Center, would go on to study lithography at the Art Students League, and by 1948 would establish his own workshop, which remains active to this day. First and foremost, a modernist, Blackburn experimented with abstraction, and his technical rigor pushed the medium to new heights as a fine art. His workshop welcomed an incredibly diverse roster of artists as he worked to challenge the exclusionary practices of other established printmaking studios. I begin with these three artists, Olds, Catlett, and Blackburn, to signal how printmaking was one of the mediums that actually opened doors for many women and artists of color to become major players who shaped the field and could bring their lived experiences to the table. They were part of a moment in American art that really set the stage for the development of radical printmaking. As the 1960s gave rise to pop art, many artists like Sister Corita Kent continued this tradition, infusing their work with social concerns, the preferential option for the poor, the anti-war movement, and trained many others in the process. All the while, the civil rights movement raged on, police violence increased, and Latinx communities took an active part in protesting discrimination. This spark is what ignited the Chicano movement and many coalitional social movements of this time period. And yet when you looked at the work of the famous white painters and what they were making at established mid-century studios such as Tamarind, Universal Limited Art Editions, Gemini, and Cyrus, you did not see any of these sociopolitical issues. Their cold indifference and unwillingness to invite artists of color to their residency programs motivated folks like Sister Karen Bocalero, Alan Edmonds, and Joe Segura to start their own workshops. This was a game changer because now they had access to materials, printers with specialized knowledge, quality paper, and equipment. These spaces recruited Latinx youth into collaborative workshop environments. Together, they produced a shared radical iconography that united Chicanas and Chicanos with Puerto Ricans and other oppressed groups. This body of work has been taken up by regionally focused exhibitions, including Just Another Poster, Pressing the Point, and Estampas de la Raza. But Printing the Revolution is the first time that we get to see the legacy of this graphic arts movement at a national level. To see this exhibition is to witness not only these remarkable works, it is a window onto the impressive networks of artists that developed the intergenerational mentorship, the stewardship of these archives by dedicated collectors like Tomás Ibarra Frausto, Ricardo and Harriet Romo, Gilberto Cárdenas and Dolores Carrillo, and Margaret Terrazas, but also to see the way younger artists like Jesus Aldamando, Ernesto Llerena Montejano, and Michael Menchaca carry this torch forward. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce these two very special artists to you tonight. They will each get a chance to provide a brief overview of their practice, and then we'll have an opportunity to engage in a conversation followed by a Q&A with the audience. Jos Sances is a printmaker and muralist from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm showing you his print on the right here. He founded Alliance Graphics, a successful union screen print shop, and several years earlier co-founded Mission Gráfica at San Francisco's Mission Cultural Center. He has shown artwork at many galleries and museums and was part of the groundbreaking exhibition Committed to Print at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. He is also one of the provocateurs behind the collective known as the Great Tortilla Conspiracy, which he co-founded with Renee Yanez, Rio Yanez, and Art Hazelwood. The Library of Congress acquired almost 500 of his prints recently. Our next guest is Pepe Coronado, who was born and raised in the Dominican Republic and currently resides between Austin, Texas, and New York City. Coronado is a founding member of the print collective Dominican York Proyecto GRAFICA, founder of Coronado Print Studio, and was a resident teaching artist at the Hudson River Museum in New York. He has taught printmaking at the Corcoran College of Art, Georgetown University, and at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, where he earned his master's in fine arts. Coronado was a master printer for Pyramid Atlantic in Silver Spring, Maryland, the Handprint Workshop International in Alexandria, Virginia, and the Cydia Project in Austin, Texas. He exhibits widely in national and international exhibitions and is part of museum collections such as El Museo del Barrio, the Hood Museum, and the Library of Congress. So please join me in welcoming Jos Sances.
Okay, let me start. I'm going to click through my presentation very quickly because I have a lot of images. This first image is a print by Renee Castro, and all the prints I'm going to show initially are all street posters that were actually utilitarian and used to advertise events. And they frequently were also sold at the exhibit at the events, but they're all printed at the Cultural Center. Renee and I started the Mission Gráfica in 1981, and I worked there for 8 years. This is a collaborative print I made with Enrique Chagoya. We actually would draw on each other's work. This is a Juan Fuentes print, and he became the director of Mission Gráfica after Renee. Nancy Hom, a really talented printmaker. We did many prints with her. She also was a talented printmaker herself. This was a collaborative poster I made with Renee Yanez. Excuse me, I'm getting some message here. Day of the Dead print. Another one, this is my own print. Again, I'm going to start moving now away from kind of event posters. This was an event poster for New El Salvador today with, as you can see, the stars. This was a screen print I did with Francisco Letelier, which ended up being a Jackson Browne album cover. This now we're moving away from event posters. This is an edition by Carmen Lomas Garza we did, an edition by Rupert Garcia, Esther Hernandez. And many of these people are also represented in the show. And this is, Renee was a Chilean exile who spent time in jail in Pinochet's prison, and was there when Victor Jara was killed. This is a Yolanda Lopez. Now we're moving on. This is work from Alliance Graphics. And this is a women's portfolio. And I did this portfolio 25 years ago, and I think the work is still incredibly vital. It was curated by Robin Henderson, who ran the Art Center. And the two of us did 4 portfolio projects together, each one with 10 prints. And there was a way to raise funds for the center, and also this is a Mildred Howard print. I made many prints with Mildred. Claudia Bernardi. This is again about El Salvador. This is a Spirit Catcher by Carrie Mae Weems. This is a Hung Lu print. And I think, again, with what's been going on, this is actually a picture of a child prostitute from the turn of the century. This is from a portfolio I did with the Alternative Museum, again with 10 artists, and the Ben Sakaguchi, which is similar. This is a Luis Jimenez print from that same portfolio. Luis Cruz Aceta print. Again, I can't show all the prints, but just to give a taste of what they are. This is from Beyond 1992 portfolio, again with the Berkeley Arts Center, Rupert Garcia print. This is a Native American Jean Lamar from Northern California print. Justice Matters portfolio. This is Eric Drucker, who you've probably seen a lot of his covers on the New Yorker. I continued making all kinds of utilitarian posters and still do. This one was actually I made, as you can see, in 2013. It was for a benefit for Renee Yanez and Yolanda Lopez. They were fighting eviction and actually won. I have a long history of making artwork with Middle East Children's Alliance and about many issues. And if you want to try a political litmus test poster, make one about Palestine. This is a project I did with students from Berkeley High School. I want you to notice this is in 2016. They had a racial incident at their school. They wanted to make this mural, and it's made of screen printed tile. We did a scratchboard drawing and then screen printed the tile. That's the class. This is a screen print tile workshop I did in Mexico, in Todos Santos with Donna Billick. We made an addition to these benches. And basically I just teach screen print technique with ceramics. And then finally, the Great Tortilla Conspiracy. And this is basically print chocolate onto tortillas, and they can either be eaten or saved. And we've done hundreds of events. That one was a teacher demonstration in front of City Hall. I have some that are archived. They're 10 or 15 years old. And you can see we do them for all kinds of things. This is my favorite one. This we did at the Oakland Museum. We screen printed on Fig Newtons. And there's dear Renee, who passed a couple of years ago. And he and I did many things together. And now that I'm retired from Alliance Graphics, I actually have been working with the San Francisco Poster Syndicate, where we print in the streets. This is a recent print, and again, done under COVID, so I had to do them in my studio. This is an example of one of my scratch boards that I make into prints. This is probably the most popular street print I made. I made this a week or two after he kneeled down, and printed them a few times, and there's a tortilla from the same image. This is a print I made last year. Again, this was a street print, and they were really popular. And again, it was after John Lewis died. another one of my scratch boards. This is a Bernie Sanders print that I did hundreds of that were wheat pasted up all over when he was running for office. And then finally, again, what you do when you're retired, this is a 51-foot scratch board of a whale. And embedded into the surface of the whale is the history of America from 1850 to the present. It's a history of capitalism, basically about the exploitation of workers and of natural resources and the environment. So that's quick, a 7-minute slide presentation of what I've been doing for the last 40 years. And in just a second, Pepe will be following me with his work. This is my last slide. Thank you very much. There we go. Let's see, how do we get out of here?
All right. Well, thank you, Josh, and thank you, Tatiana, for the great introduction, and get to see Josh work this extensively. And Carmen and Claudia, thank you guys so much for what you have done with this great exhibition at the Smithsonian, and to your staff, which I'm sure there are other people's involved. My trajectory is gonna start actually in Austin, Texas. I view the print making medium as a collaborative medium, and I think that actually the collaboration part is actually a medium to me. So I really work in my shop based on that concept of collaboration. So and the way this happened, I met Sam Coronado in Austin, Texas in '93. I came to Austin in '91 and met Sam, who had just started the project, Serie Print Project. And he started that project based on an experience he had in self-help graphics. That he went there to publish a print with them, and just really got taken by the community aspect of the print shop in the neighborhood, what it did to artists and what it did to the community. So he came back to Austin and started the Serie project, and I was lucky to meet him the first year. And the printer he started the project with had moved away. So I was a commercial screen printer. I used to run a print shop here in Austin. So my skills with his needs at the moment were a great match. And of course, I was taking a class with him, and we have the same last name. So that sparked a bigger conversation. So here is Sam and I publishing a print in his studio. The Serie project grew in a way that went beyond his imagination. I published this print with the Serie project in '95, and I was very concerned at that time with the 500th anniversary of the so-called arrival of the Spanish in the Americas, and the lack of recognition. So this was a tribute to that. I went to Self-Help Graphics, and Sam actually sent it to Self-Help Graphic to see what he had seen and experienced that. So I moved away from DC, from Austin, and went to Washington, DC, where I was lucky to work with Pyramid Atlantic, directed by Helen Frederick, and the Handprint Workshop International, directed by Dennis O'Neill. So the whole experience of printmaking studio got expanded there. These two prints relate to the one on the left, to the 9/11 attacks. I was in DC when that happened. And the one on the right is actually something that was going on after 9/11, and people that are not from DC might not have experienced this, but there was a Amtrak. There was a biochemical in the mailing system that were being distributed. So I made this piece about this fear that one day we were going to have to wear masks, everybody. So is a very interesting how that turns around. I moved from DC after teaching in a couple of places and working in this shop to New York. Very beautiful experience where I can actually get close to my community of Dominicans in New York. Met a bunch of artists, and we all have the same concern that we wanted to spark some kind of action. And my experience with the graphic work and the collaborative aspect of the print, we co-founded among these 12 artists, the Dominican York Proyecto GRAFICA, which was to establish a Dominican American presence and with a mission of collaboration and community engagement. This was in my studio, and this is on Rider Ureña's studio. So we were very ambulatory, very practical, very experimental with the process that we were sharing. Our visions were loaded with activities for kids. We were very into posting our work in the kids and in schools for education. We did as well panel for the audiences, and this is one of my own work at the time. So this parallel to DYPG, I had an ambulatory print shop that I will take around in the neighborhood and engage with the community that way because of the lack of art spaces in Washington Heights and Inwood. I founded the Coronado Print Studio and eventually moved it to El Barrio in East Harlem, and was a very special place because of the location and the amount of artists that we were able to collaborate, doing workshops, artists working together, artists sharing their skills and abilities in all kinds of different parts of the medium. We got a lot of visits from schools, universities, and that was just expands the outreach. Every time an artist will come around, like in this case, Malaquias Montoya was visiting New York, so I invited to the studio and invited a bunch of artists so they can come and meet and talk to and share a moment and hear his story that was so inspirational. Studio openings, exhibits at museums, international show where we would take our collaborative work to different places, in this case, Dominican Republic. And we have a special collaboration among Dominican and Haitian artists that we were showcasing our abilities together. Some of our work, Vladimir Civil Charlier is a great artist in Harlem and Haitian descent and make works related to this event. My work based on histories between the US and Dominican Republic. This is about the Intrepid, which is in the show. It's a piece that is based on the Intrepid, which is actually a museum in New York. And the Intrepid was the ship that invaded Dominican Republic the year I was born. This deal with the Haitian-Dominican relationship and the sugarcane fields, some more immigration-based work, and then finishing up with this collaboration with Carlos Jesus Martinez. This is a 12-foot graffiti print, painting and print. So thank you guys, and I appreciate it. I'm sure we'll get to some questions soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Pepe and Jos. Jos, if I can have you turn your camera on and both of you turn your microphones on. Thank you. Excellent. Well, I love seeing your work, and I know that was a very concise presentation, but we got such a broad overview of your practice. And both of you are evidence that the Chicano graphic arts movement was not strictly about Chicanos. It included so many diverse people. It included Dominicans, it included white allies like yourself. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how working with these artists impacted your politicization.
Would you like me to, who should go first?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Well, first off, I was so nervous about getting started that I didn't thank the people from the Smithsonian enough. Thank you very much for everything you've done. You've made this easy for us, and thank you. And I love seeing your work, Pepe, too. I was really lucky to work with Renee Castro. He was a brilliant graphic artist, and he was a tortured person who was arrested the first day at the coup in Pinochet's, at the coup in Chile. And as a person who was young, I was 10 years younger than Renee. In many ways, he took me under his wing politically. And I learned a tremendous amount working very hard, making many, many prints for the community and all different kinds of prints. I intentionally showed a lot of those prints, as beautiful as they were, many of them were just wheat pasted or stuck in windows on the street in the 80s. And people would take them out of the windows. It would be funny to go around and you see people write on the back of them saying once the event over, it was their print and they'd have their name on it. And I think that's it, at the Mission Cultural Center, Mission Gráfica, which is still going, was a vital community spot. And again, I learned a lot being there with the many people like Renee Yanez and Renee Castro, who were amazing community people.
And I think that speaks to the fact that the Mission District was super diverse, right?
Yes.
And you had political exiles from Latin America, and you also had a large Mexican American community, Central American refugees that were arriving on the scene. So it was such a dynamic environment that you were a part of.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. It was very dynamic. And again, I think, the cultural center was, more or less was, kind of a Chicano center that was open to everybody, and really was open to everybody. And
Great. And what was the case for you, Pepe?
Yeah, it's very interesting because, I met Sam and I've been in this country for just a couple of years. So it was a vital moment for me because I only can speak for my experience, but once you leave your country and you're in another place, after about 2 or 3 years, that's when it hits you that you are actually, that you left and that you are now somewhere else. So with Sam, although Sam was an American artist and, veteran and generations in Texas, he was, as he used to say, he was bicultural, right? So that's interesting because it's like, oh, and where did that come from, right? That experience. How do you hold on to this aspect of yourself and your ancestry and make this new form? So I learned that aspect because once you're at that stage that I was, I had to realize how to function and be, true to myself. And what I learned with Sam was I had to engage with this society, socially, politically. And what he was doing at the time, his studio was in East Austin. East Austin was not gentrified yet. It was very divided. It was very segregated. The city was split in half by the highway. So he had this dream of creating this space for artists of color, but for the community to have something to relate to, right? And I learned that aspect of the importance of doing the work in certain communities, right? And how do you create a space that is rich in the sense that different artists, different generations come in and express their concerns and their interests and dialogues about, politics and concepts and art and all that mixed together. But the work is produced in our section. And that's what I kind of got ingrained in me. Like my voice, I can dig into myself and my past and my culture, but attach it to relevant issues of the moment, right? So that kind of it's still growing. I'm still learning that, right? It's a very organic state of mind and a conscious state of mind.
I've actually heard you say that you learned to be an immigrant
Yes.
working with Chicano artists. So I know it was incredibly impactful for you.
Yes, because you know, he was, and again, Austin at that time, we're talking early 90s, you know, like me as a Dominican artist in Austin was weird because people are like, who are you? Where are you from? You know, a lot of people don't even know that much about Dominican Republic. I'm back in Austin now, and most people, you tell them and people know. But in those days, like, what? Where is that? You know? So yeah, you learn with him. I was able to learn that process, how to process my own and make it my own, you know, like he shared his experience for growing up and coming out of the Chicano movement, and some of his friends that were using, like Gilberto Cardenas and Dr. Romo, that were at that time going up in their field, that they use collecting as a social tool, right? So I observed this, that, you know, you can one day in the street, but 10 years later, you might be running a studio or collecting work, and there is all kinds of angle to stay socially active.
Right, right. So in terms of thinking about the legacy of printmaking, both of you lost very important collaborators. I'm thinking of Renee Yanez and Sam Coronado here, who were leaders in the field. And for Jos, I'd like to know how you initially met Renee, and for Pepe, I'd love to hear about what are some of the important lessons that you took away from Coronado, and for both of you, you know, how can we continue to honor their work? I'm thinking of that proverb that says, when an elder dies, a whole library burns, right? And so how do we continue to tell their stories?
I met Renee Yanez. I actually lived, when I first came to San Francisco in the middle 70s, I lived around the corner from Galleria. I literally like a block away. So I would go in there all the time and you know, and see the artwork and talk to him and so forth. And I actually got really into Chicano culture and met Renee Castro. They were restarting screen print classes at the Mission Cultural Center, and I went in. I was working at a pretty high level commercial screen print operation at the time, and I went in to take the class because I wanted to make some political posters for myself. And we met, and Renee Castro and I talked after the class for 8 hours straight. And he invited me to co-teach the class, and that's how I started with him. And then once I started doing some prints at the Cultural Center, then that's really when I met Renee Yanez. And I did many posters for Galleria and all kinds of things. And actually Renee, early on, meeting him, and he and I and Renee Yanez gave myself, Enrique Chagoya, and Renee Castro a show at Galleria because he was very impressed with our work. So I think, so it was, you know, again, I think the Mission had the feeling almost of a small town. And like I say, I think, you know, that you know, a person's reputation meant a lot, and you know what people were doing. People were really interested in each other. There wasn't hardly any competition. It was, you know, it was kind of a support thing. Everyone was supporting each other. And so if you were doing an event, well, maybe I could help you with the poster for it, or if this was going on, can you come over and help, you know, take the chairs down tomorrow night? Renee Yanez used to say the people who get to print the posters are the one who stay after the meeting. And I think in some ways that, you know, that was, you know, the case, and that there was many other things that were involved. The printmaking was just part of a bigger cultural thing that was going on. And again, Renee Yanez was amazing in that. You know, I think I showed the poster from the 1985 border show, which was actually, Renee bought the Border Arts Workshop from San Diego up to San Francisco for the first time. And I think that's, you know, I think Guillermo Gomez Pena was with them then. And again, he introduced really to everyone there what was going on at the border and how much the things were changing at the border. I mean, when Renee grew up, he lived in Tijuana and crossed into San Diego to go to school every day, across the border, and actually it was no issue. He was in the US military. But the funny thing is, many years later, I said to Renee, I said, hey, we need to go to Mexico. I was invited to go to Mexico to do a workshop. And he said, I can't go. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, you know, I'm not a citizen. And he wasn't, with all that he contributed to the arts in San Francisco, and it's enormous. He never became a citizen, but he certainly was a citizen of the mission.
Absolutely. Pepe?
Yeah, go ahead, Tatiana.
Oh, yeah, I was just calling you.
Okay, so yeah, it's interesting because, you know, one of the, again, I was with Sam and the project at the very beginning. So things were very humble, right? In terms of resources, space, he had a nice space studio, but, you know, we were cleaning and reclaiming screens outside. And, you know, I was very humble. And Sam, it was just me and him at that time. So, you know, seeing Sam cleaning up and getting on the roof and fixing the roof and all this kind of thing and inviting artists. And actually, one thing that happened at the beginning, he used to invite a lot of artists, and some artists said no at the beginning because they were like, well, yeah, what is this project, you know? And then 3 years later, they were calling like, hey, you remember when you invited me to do a print? Can I come now, you know? So I experienced that, you know, that perseverancia, you know, that effort, that humbleness, and then overcoming all these obstacles that, were hard, right? So that was in the kind of daily routine. And going back to the immigration thing, one of the things that I learned from him up to this day, I keep that very sharp in my mind, is you don't have to assimilate. You can integrate, right? So assimilation, you have to give something up. Integration, you bring something in, right? So you merge these experiences. So that was very important for me at that time, very critical for my formation, right? So those were kind of a lot of the thing I learned with him was really based on experience, you know, just watching him go through this process, he and Sylvia were at the beginning of when they established Mexi Arte Museum, and then Sam was in a couple of different efforts, you know, and Sergio was kind of his own thing, but he was involved in all these other aspects of the culture, and the art scene at the time, he wasn't being looked at yet. So it was kind of in the background. So to make that effort with no attention or no, knowing that eventually you're gonna produce something valuable. And then the community started to recognize the value of it, and that's what we're trying to keep now alive.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking about this this idea of how we preserve the stories, how we build these archives. And I know that both of you have personally been involved in these efforts. Jos, you've been involved with the Library of Congress, and Pepe, you have also, worked with different collectives over the years. I recall you building the first flat files that Seria Project had, And it's such a testament to the rascuache aesthetics of making do, right? Because that's what was possible. But could you tell us a little bit about these efforts to preserve these print archives and how you've been involved? And if we can start with Jos.
Basically, well, for one thing, we've for the last 5 years been working on a book about Mission Gráfica, which is done. We were courted by a few prestigious publishers, and the deals fell apart. So we're leaning now. We're probably going to self-publish it. So it will give it's been signed off by all the participants, and there's been many in the almost 40 years. So we're doing that. I have Graphica prints were pretty well archived. And I think UC Santa Barbara has a big collection. I know there's lots of them at the Center for the Study of Political Graphics. So they're preserved, and the Smithsonian has a lot. Between myself and Juan Fuentes, they have almost 1,000 posters. So now it's hopefully that they haven't digitized all of them, that they will digitize them so that actually there's access to them. And then most importantly, I think I have the only collection of tortillas from the Great Tortilla Conspiracy, and I have about probably 200. And it's funny, no institution wants them, even though they all love them. And they are archival. I mean, once they're dried out, I have some that they're over 10 years old, and they as long as they don't get wet, which is the case with any print, they're fine. So I'm hoping someday that maybe I can find a place to put the tortillas. So
yeah, that's a great question, Tatiana, and nice to hear Josh's experience with that. Going back to that little file you mentioned, when we built that little file, we thought that was gonna be enough. We were like, hey, we got a file with 7 levels that's plenty. And, and that goes to show you that a lot of these projects, you don't have this grandiose idea of what it is, right? It's just the humble process of that instinct to create or to do something that you think is valuable. And in that case, I love the fact that it was not just valuable for one person, so it was valuable for personally, obviously, because you're involved, but the artists, the other artists, the community itself, and the identity of the city in this case, right? Like, and so that was very valuable. And I learned that, and that's one of the things that I comment with the group, the collective Dominican York Proyecto GRAFICA. And it's interesting that you mentioned these big collections, because and some people are like, why do you care to be in these big institutions? And if you care about history, they're important. They have to be eventually, you will love to have them collect their work. What we did with the Dominican York Proyecto GRAFICA was that another level of
I think we lost Pepe there. Let's see if can you hear me, Pepe? Well, I can see that we are getting a little bit close to time. And so this might be a moment to transition and have Carmen join us for the Q&A.
Thank you, Tatiana, Jos, and Pepe, whenever he's able to come back for the great conversation. We're getting some great questions in the Q&A, and let me see which one we can start with. And maybe this is a good question to start with, Jos. The question is there room for more community-based studios? How would I start one?
There is definitely room for them. I think it's I think one of the difficult parts, and I'll be honest, is the economics, and that you need to have some kind of a plan. And aside from all the other things you do, even Alliance Graphics, which came after Mission Gráfica, we were faced with, because it was a union shop and we were paying living wages and all this kind of stuff, we had a lot of economic issues that we had to deal with. So that's one thing. But I think it's not impossible, and it depends on what you mean by that. I mean, again, the San Francisco Poster Syndicate was started at the Art Institute, really pretty much under Art Hazelwood with his students, to print in the streets. And now it's grown, it's an informal group of about 75 artists who we'll go to different events and demonstrations and different kind of things and make artwork that's basically passed out. It's not a money-making thing. That's easy to do, frankly. And it's a good way to get started because, again, you know, I hate to, even like when you're out in the street printing, someone will always come up and say, can you make a poster for me? I have this bakery down the street and I really would love some posters. And really, in a sense, you know, that's how you get started. So, but I think, again, it's something that if there's a need in every community for that kind of space. And I think, again, if you're willing to teach classes, if you're willing to even open your space to other artists to come in and work, if you're willing to work with other artists making additions, you can do it. It's not, but I can tell you from experience, from starting 2 different shops, it's a way more than full-time job to get it up and running and produce the kind of work, the amount of work you have to produce to survive. But it can definitely be done.
Thank you, Jos. I have another question for the 2 of you, and maybe we can start with Pepe responding this time. In many ways, the legacy and networks of Chicano printmaking were facilitated through the print shop, right? The print shop is a really important aspect of where that legacy takes place. Can you speak about how the collaborative spirit of the print shop contributed to and shaped that legacy?
Yeah, I think, you know, again, going back to something that I experienced from the movement as I was forming my own experiences. The studio, especially the print shops, are very crucial because you know, again, going back to the medium inherent quality of collaboration. So there is always this influx of people. But one of the things that was the most impressive about Chicanxes was that the mentorship aspect, right? That these young artists can come in and talk, and the older, more established artists can share these experiences, right? And that's really crucial for any kind of message to stay alive. And it's not they have to be the same message. It's with the hope that this message is going to take a new form based on a new generation. And that's really, really, really important. One of the things that I appreciated of Sam in particular was his willingness to listen to the younger artists, right? So that they were bringing different concerns and starting to use in different images, breaking away from traditional symbols and stuff. So that's really important, where history is being passed, but new ideas are being formed. And that's to me the most important aspect of sharing and passing on that experience.
Jos, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think no, I think Pepe said it all. I think that was good.
Or Tatiana, from the perspective of a historian?
The aspect of collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting is the way that even notions like authorship were being negotiated at that level, right? So you had collectives like the Royal Chicano Air Force who would not sign their names on a lot of their work. They would just sign as a collective, or folks at La Silk Screen Center, for that matter. And that was something pretty radical and unique, and it I think it challenged a lot of these histories of the artist having to be an individual, working alone, or being like some male genius somewhere. And so I do believe that these collaborative traditions, they had a huge impact in the formation of these artists.
Can I say one more thing? I mean, yes, absolutely. We did, and I actually did a stint at La Raza Graphics, just going in there. I printed at night there. I would go in at 5 because they hated smells, so I would go in at 5 and print till after midnight frequently. But yeah, so we didn't sign things, and at Mission Gráfica we tried that, and we lasted for about a year, and then people really wanted to sign their work, so it changed. But I understand, I certainly understand that thing. But the truth about actually working on each other's works, there's many works that both Renee Castro and I worked on, and both of us printed them. So we would, and we did pretty long runs. So a lot of times, I might have run colors 3, 4, 5, and then he ran 6 and 7, in other words, so it was really collaborative. But, we really drew on each other's artwork, which was unusual. So I did that again. That poster I showed with Segoya, that was half his drawing, half mine. That, the piece with Renee Yanez, I did a number of posters with him, same way. He and I were close and worked together. He would cut things, we would work together and make images. So all of that, was that. But even, that I showed that the mural that I did with the Berkeley High School students, that scratchboard drawing was drawn by 20 kids. And scratchboard was a great medium because they could correct each other's artwork. And so the kids who drew better would fix other kids' stuff. Kids who didn't draw well at all drew the signs, but they did that collaboratively and collectively. And when they were doing that, it really reminded me of things, 25 years earlier when we worked together. And at any rate, just a thought.
Yeah. Carmen, can I add something?
Absolutely.
Another aspect that, and I hope I can articulate it well, is that I notice, and I really follow that ideal. That one of the things about these studio spaces and this environment is that you can be part of that. You can come in and you will come in not because of your credentials, right? Like a lot of us learn our skills in the community, not because we went to this school or we have this experience. So what brought you in was concerns and ideas. And yes, a lot of people have drawing skills and printing skills and all that. And a lot of people went to our schools and all that, but not everybody had to. So that was, to me, that really opens up the field in an organic way. So some of the credentials that were important are, your own experience as a person, right? And you're from this neighborhood, you're from that neighborhood, and the history that those things have are a lot of the time the basis for your conceptual framework, rather than value only acquiring these concepts based on academic studies or that kind of space.
Thank you, Pepe. I think that really flows into another question posed by one of our viewers. And the question is, the sense of community is so strong with these works. How did you learn to trust each other with the process? So I think it speaks to some of what you were saying about being able to come into this conversation from wherever you are, right? But maybe
Yeah,
you
and
both elaborate on that.
yeah, if you don't mind me starting, and this is something that I really talk about, to develop in my own interest, is that a part of the mission that we developed in at the studio in Harlem was the collective voices are more important than individual voices. And when you talk about collective voices, you have to be open to all kinds of ideas. So I'm not only interested on this kind of language or this kind of framework, because then I'm limiting the voice of the group of a group, right? So you can come in and bring a perspective that might not be aligned with mine, and that challenged my perspective. So I believe in that growth, and to me that's very important. And that even in the DYPG, when we formed DYPG, the diverse of the group backgrounds were very relevant. And some people, brought the point, oh, why aren't why didn't you guys select more people that were more skilled in certain things of or academic background? And it's like, that what's the point of that, right? That you need all this diverse perspective from people that have different experiences. And to me, that's the only way that voice become relevant. Because again, I'm not telling anybody's story. I can't talk for a historical event. I can't talk for my own people. I'm not the representative of nothing. I'm just one voice of that big group, right? And that's what to me is interesting.
I think an interesting thing that we saw in both of your presentations was your use of a lot of historical images and your interest in history, right? Can you talk a little bit about how research plays into your printmaking?
You want me to go first? Well, for me, it's really important. I mean, as I get older, the images I make I think are becoming kind of deeper, and I'm looking for metaphor and symbolism, and I see my work as very narrative. So yes, I look at all kinds of stuff, and I try to draw from many things. And usually, if I'm going to do a print on a certain issue, I'll do a fair amount of research, and it's, to me, it's really important. It's also it's a great pleasure for me. I really love history. So, so yes, I think in some ways my work has become more like writing. And even I'm working now on a series that's going to take a year to finish, and it's a monthly poem, and it's a visual poem. I'm trying not to do strictly straight line, political work, but including more personal things and other things, and trying to do it in a way that has kind of a poetic feel as opposed to kind of a hardcore, political feel. It's a long-term experiment, kind of, but yeah, yes, and as you can tell, like the whale had hundreds of images from historical photographs that I drew from. So yes, I mean, I use stuff.
Yes, I mean, I do a good amount of work based on historical facts, and it was, to me, was a vehicle to understand a lot of things. And as we are experiencing now in this past year and up to now, all the issues that history has, all the wrong history that we're taught, and growing up in the art, like a lot of people growing up here, the history we got wasn't necessarily true. So my search was to find some of that truth. So for a couple of reasons. You know, when you talk about migration, I question my migration. Why do I come here? And why are so many Dominicans in New York and in the US, right? So you start going back to, you know, what are the reasons for these things? So I went back and kept finding all these key moments in history. And it started, you know, 1965, the intervention where they divert our political trajectory. It goes back to 1916 when they occupied both Haiti and DR and what happened during that time. It goes back to 1827 during the Haitian occupation that they opened the door for a lot of free slaves to go to DR. And what was the consequence of that in our society? So when people talk about Dominicans are a new group, no, we've been linked to this country for a long time, and we have a lot of historical events that were very significant. So, and that's why it's you know, I'm trying to make sense of myself and finding these true facts that we're discovering that were not taught or clarified to people. So that's the important. And I collaborated with artists like Sibyl and Regine Lace that are Haitian American. And it was really important to work with them because the Haitian perspective of some of the issues that I was looking at was really helped to round up the corners of that story itself. And then with artists like Carlos Jesus Martinez Dominguez, that a graffiti writer from New York that work a lot in history. So it was able to get history from, in fact, from all these different angles. And that does help the construction of these long stories and realities.
That's great. A lot of the ideas that you are raising, I think, really connect with some of the themes of our exhibition. Obviously, I think Jos's work appears in the section that we titled "Reimagining National and Global Histories." And it is about kind of raising these issues that have been outside of American history, but that are critical to it, right? And we have a question here for Pepe. And it says, Pepe, how would you compare the collaborative atmosphere at the various studios you've been involved with the atmosphere at a traditional art college like MICA?
Very different, very, very different. And different because of approaches and the outreach, right? With Study Project, with Pyramid Atlantic was very sociopolitically active, but very broad and open. So you have all kinds of different perspectives. The Handprint Workshop International, at the time that I was there, we're doing a project with Russian artists. So even though those are people that are different, but the political intertwine of those communities have relevance in our own experiences. At the time in MICA, I had two stints in MICA as a teaching and going to school there, and then they hired me after I graduated. It was an interesting time. This was, in the 90s. So one of the reasons I left academia, to be honest, at that time, was because I was looking for more diverse background scholarship to teach, and it was very limited. And from my perspective, I find obviously a lot of Mexican history of printmaking from Mexico and from the US, a lot of Puerto Rican, and because of the relationship they had, and a lot of Cubans. And so I was concerned. So one of the reasons I left was to dig into what are Dominicans doing, and what can we do for the medium, to play a role in the medium, because of the power that I have always felt that printmaking has. Not comparing with any other medium like painting and sculpture. I just think that printmaking has a special place, as Josh have described, posters and more more out in the street kind of activity, to gallery, to museum, to all this. So I had this really diverse voice, and I felt that that was a great tool for us to work together in that field.
Thank you. I know that we're all in a kind of, pandemic exhaustion at this point. I'm really tired of living this way, but the pandemic experience, I'm sure, has really impacted your artwork and the way you've been working. So I'm wondering if you could, share a little bit about what that has meant for your work, and then what are your goals and desires for like a post-COVID world?
Well, for me, since I retired from Alliance Graphics, my connection with the print world really was in the street, either as Tortilla Conspiracy or Poster Syndicate, and that obviously had to stop. Though I did do a few of those prints. I think I did the Selma and the Portland print I did in my studio, and then they were passed out. And same way, I think that the other one I showed of for the drivers union, I did. It was for a car. They ended up using them in a car demonstration, where they drove in cars. So for me, it's hard because that's the thing that most appeals to me about printmaking now. I'm really not that interested in sitting down with an artist and doing a 10 color print anymore, even though that was my life for many years. And so having the direct connection with the community is what I most crave. And so I can't wait till I can go back to that. I'm ready. Everyone else needs to get the vaccination. And again, I miss that contact. I think having someone directly respond to your print, or having a 10-year-old who's totally fascinated that you're printing with chocolate on a tortilla and can't believe it, thinks it's a miracle, I miss that a lot. And that happens almost every time we do a Tortilla Conspiracy thing. There's always some kid who's amazed at it. And again, that kind of interaction with the community, I think, it kind of demystifies art. You look at these incredible prints, and hardly anyone really understands how much work went into them, how long they took, what, the difficulties that the printer had to go through to make them. But again, when someone sees you printing on the street and you're printing a pretty high resolution halftone that's coming out really beautiful, and you just hand them a wet piece of paper that you tell them to hang on to it for 10 minutes and it'll dry. That to me is an experience, and it demystifies what the print process is and makes it more direct. And someone can quickly put together, well, if they ran 15 colors on this paper and they ran 200 of them, man, they must have took them a while. And it does. So at any rate, I missed the interaction. I can't wait to get back out there and do it again. And I do think, like, though I'm not directly involved in a print center, those print centers are really important places for the community. And I think printmaking has kind of slowed everywhere because, they just haven't been able to be in the confined spaces you usually are in to work. So at any rate, I can't wait for things to open up again.
Yeah, sometimes answering about COVID, it's almost like a different experience that keep changing. The pandemic have created a lot of issues that we're dealing with, because I think that now, life and the practice is so tied together, because, when you work with a lot of people and see different artists, every time you see one person, there is a new story coming out. Their dad had it, their sister had it, that they had it, that they lost their job, that they're being evicted, that they lost their studio. that they're doing well. You know, it's all this mixed emotion that sometimes people, you know, when they meet, we're planning things and we get very excited about planning projects and ideas, and we can do this, and then you hit that reality. Oh wait, we can't do it until this happens. Oh, we have to wait for this to happen. So it's this kind of burst of energy, and then, you know, this down, and burst of energy, and then this down. So we're kind of getting used to this mixed emotion. I remember I was in DC when 9/11 happened. Actually, I was driving into Micah, and you know, that same feeling of feeling lost, feeling disconnected, disoriented, and how do you react to something that you almost have no control? So this kind of processes is what I'm, you know, some people can react really well creatively. I have felt that personally, I've been a little more into almost like a introspective process of reevaluating things and creatively and personal, right? So and then there are people are very effective and important. I have a friend in New York, Alicia Grullon, that is doing this amazing series of work about the pandemic, and it's so relevant and so important. But you have to hold an urge, like, oh, do I need to be doing something about COVID? You know, it's that a kind of emotional roller coaster that I feel that I'm going through. And of course, I have to move the studio a couple of times in the middle, trying to, you know, because I couldn't do that rent, and luckily I'm in a really good place. But it's all the whole transitional process that have created about your practice and life, you know, because then you go home and you find your son lost his job, and you know, so then you have to gather forces to cover things like that, and so on.
Very challenging times.
Yes. And then you have a show in this great museum, but you can't go.
Yes, it's sad. As I've told everyone, the little loop of images of the video of the exhibition always brings a tear to my eye, you know, thinking that this wonderful show is kind of in the dark.
Yes.
The good news is that pretty soon we'll be launching a virtual tour of the exhibition on our website. So please keep on tuning back to our website so that you could get a preview of the show virtually. I have one more question before we wrap it up. Since we're talking about legacy, I thought that maybe we could just have you both talk a little bit about your mentorship roles and how you've been supporting younger artists, or if you support younger artists in their development.
Should I go?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, and that is a part of the practice that to me is so crucial and important. So I was lucky in New York to have a lot of people around the studio, and you know, Renee de los Santos and Carlos Martinez and Evelyn Casay, that were people that helped in the structure of and the idea of the studio. But in terms of a younger person, and in New York, we will still work together. Paloma Burge, a young graduate from Purchase College that I met, and she started working with us. And right now she's more in kind of the administrative aspect of the shop. We were hoping she will be more in the studio, but because of some health issue, the chemicals and stuff, she concentrated more on the administrative stuff, although she's a great artist and we make prints for her. And here in Austin, I'm collaborating with Jonathan Rebolloso, which is Sam's last printer. We're working together in our own shops and, you know, hopefully help out with Seria Project. And then Marie Garza, who was also related to the project is we're starting to talk. So it's very important that we keep this effort. Mentorship is hard when there are not resources to support them. It's very difficult, the effort that the young artists have to make in order to participate at the early stage of a career in a project. So a lot of things have to line up, and I'm not a believer of a lot of volunteer people, you know what I mean? So that people have to get paid. So it's very important. I really quickly, a little bit unrelated and related, like I got a master's degree because of my experience. I never went to college in undergrad, and that's credit to Micah, and then credit to that institution that can provide something, valuing something else. And Gail Deary, that hired me afterwards, was very supportive on creating an environment that I can teach on. And so the mentorship, you experience mentorship at different levels. Sometimes mentorship could be just opening a door and allow, that presence and that experience. And sometimes could be a little longer stretch of a relationship. So yeah, it's very important and complicated at the same time.
Jos?
Well, again, I have in my long history, we always had interns at Mission Gráfica. Many of those interns now are middle-aged, and many of them still make prints. I've always had interns, even I had an intern here at my studio right up until COVID started, and unfortunately she had to stop. She was a high school student who would come a couple of days a week and was really talented. And so, those opportunities, there's a good chance I'm going to do a fairly large commission in LA, and I guarantee for that project I'll hire, I already know who I'll hire as an intern. So for me, it's really important to pass that on. And I have passed it. There's so many people who screen print in the Bay Area that I had some connection with them learning how to do it. I did a thing with the art and science. There's an art and science project at UC Davis that I did a couple of workshops with, and then helped them actually build a print shop, help them, guided them to build a print shop, Labudio, at UC Davis. They print amazing stuff there. So again, it's, that's a big part of it. I think anyone who's in community arts, that's part of what they do. I mean, I think that's who you really want to share it with. And I agree with Pepe that, that a lot of the people that you share this stuff with are not necessarily college material, but they're brilliant at what they do and can figure out a career and a way to survive, using their skills, particularly, in production graphic work. And I think it's important. So.
Great. Well, thank you both for sharing your stories and your perspectives about the legacy of printmaking and the legacy of Chicanx printmaking in particular. We really appreciate all that you've shared with us tonight. And Tatiana as well for being our guide tonight and sharing so much of her knowledge. We want to just remind everyone that our next panel will be on April the 15th at 6:30, where we'll be joined by Enrique Chagoya and Irena Cervantes, and Claudia Zapata will be our moderator, and we'll be exploring indigeneity in Chicanx art. I also want to thank our SAM family who has helped us present this program tonight with all of you. And here are some of the dates and some of the upcoming programs that will be happening in April and May. So thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to seeing everyone the next time. Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you so much, Carmen.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pepe.
Gracias.
Thank you, Tatiana.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.